Good morning, everyone. I haven't talked about GMOs in about a year and a half. I have to tell you that for about 3.5, 4 years, I traveled all over the country talking with folks who had questions about GMOs. I did a lot of town halls, I did a lot of interviews, and I must say that it was so nice to come to the pet food industry when the first question I was asked was, what's the best dog food? Thank you very much. So I met Patty about, has it been a year, Patty, when I met Patty, and we were in a room of like-minded folks just talking about how we might be able to coordinate better with one another and share some information. And I used a turn of phrase which I embraced wholly in my last job, which was, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight fire with water. At least that was my experience in the story that I'm about to tell you. So let me go here. There we go. As I mentioned, or I guess Patty mentioned, right, I don't do primarily GMO or biotechnology, genetic engineering, call it what you will, work too much anymore. But I did, it was my passion. I did it in the laboratory. I negotiated agreements that were involving GMO grains so our farmers could export while I worked for USDA. And then I worked for a few other agricultural sectors and found myself in 2011 back in the middle of the GMO debate. Today I'm going to talk with you about the environment that I inherited, if you will, when I came to the Biotechnology Industry Organization. That is the International Trade Association for Biotech, Pharmaceuticals, Energy, Environment, and Food and Agriculture. I was the executive vice president there. I'm going to talk about the impact that this environment had on the national confidence with regard to food safety and on innovation of my companies and other companies in agriculture. I'll tell you what we learned, what we did, the impact of that action, and my feeling is that the lessons that I learned are not unique, and in fact I'm applying them to the pet food sector right now. Just a shout out to my current employer. It's a wonderful, wonderful job. Pet Food Institute is the National Trade Association for dog and cat food makers. We, as Patty said, our members represent 98% of the products available on the market. We've been the voice of U.S. dog and cat food treats since 1958. Our primary job is advocacy and education, very much like I think NAIA's job is. I will only provide factual information about pet food safety, nutrition, and health. I will not ever spin or shade or leave out pertinent information. I'm a scientist. I have integrity. I haven't done it in my entire adult life in my various jobs. I'm not going to start doing it now. And we work at PFI to advance a transparent, science-based regulatory environment for our members. So with regard to the GMO environment, I'm going to tell you both sides. One's the anti-GMO environment. One's the food corporation environment. The anti-GMO environment movement started about 40 years ago with efforts to ban cultivation of GMO seeds about 20 years ago, primarily in Europe. Mandatory labeling efforts are much more recent. The focus on GMO safety and a consumer right to know by the anti-GMO community was a game changer for agriculture. I have to tell you honestly, I've been in agriculture for a long time, and we didn't really give much credence to the conversation that was going on online. This, however, had a huge emotional connection with consumers and, of course, was a major fundraising tool for anti-GMO groups. While there are hundreds and hundreds of groups coordinated to fight agriculture, animal rights, animal protection, whatever, to advance animal rights, animal protection. With regard to biotech, about 20 of these groups had fighting GMOs, stopping GMOs as their primary cause. And their activity online created this. 20 groups, flip a switch, and the online conversation across the digital space, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, you name it, came alive. So what I walked into my job 4 years ago, what I faced was a crush of online advocates. Some were right on television, messaging, memes, and really distorted images. On the corporate side, food companies who are fully confident in the safety of GMOs, nonetheless, in reaction to this, to these messages, developed non-GMO versions of their signature products. Cheerios, grape nuts, more recently, last year, Hershey's chocolate, and this year, Dannon yogurt. Non-GMO projects, promoting them implicitly, because promoting them explicitly would be against the law, as better, healthier for us, better for the environment, pesticide-free. If that's what the consumer thinks non-GMO is, then the food companies will, of course, provide that product to consumers. We have to get educated. I don't fault the food companies. They want to make good products. They want to expand their customer base. That's, that's competition in the United States. But the misinformation is also online and out in the world is playing to their benefit also. These foods will join thousands of other premium priced products advertised as non-GMO, many of which have no GMO counterpart in the marketplace. So, this is my shopping experience. Just last weekend, I took notes. Nuts, non-GMO. There's no GMO nut, but there are non-GMO nuts, and they are priced at a premium. Water, ice, salt, rock salt, olive and avocado oils, spices, flavorings, cosmetics, cat litter, or non-GMO cat litter, I saw that this weekend. And all produce in the supermarket, except for rainbow papaya and innate potatoes, is non-GM. My supermarket advertises as I'm walking around over the loudspeaker, proudly serving non-GMO produce. Yes. So what's happened with the conversation on both ends of the spectrum? We've seen consumer and legislator confidence undermined. What about the safety of the U.S. food? What about U.S. agriculture? What's really going on? There's doubt in the minds of our stakeholders. In the last 15 years, my colleague Ab Basu, he's sitting in the back, told me he did a lot of state government affairs work with me when I was at Bio. He estimates there were between 1,500 and 2,000 bills to restrict GMO technology at play across the country. In 2014, there were 100 bills across 30 states and Puerto Rico. Policymaker and regulator confidence were also undermined, have also been undermined. When I arrived, the approval timelines for GMO seeds were escalating. That's the top line, U.S. While our competitor countries, those timelines had either stayed the same, Canada, or were shrinking. They were getting products much faster to the market than we were. Argentina and Brazil, in the red and the blue lines respectively, were the primary are our primary competitors. I have to tell you that when I put this slide up, Secretary Vilsack was furious at me that I put this up. And I have to tell you that he and APHIS, USDA's APHIS, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, for whom I worked proudly for 6 years, they've turned it around. They've done a fantastic job getting products to market as quickly as they can without compromising any safety. And I think we should be really proud of USDA's effort in this regard. On the animal side, thank you. On the animal side, it's not regulated by USDA, it's regulated by FDA, and it has taken some products 20 years to get through the approval process. It's hard to keep a company going, and I'll talk about this in just a second, when your product is stuck in the regulatory system for a couple of decades. So why do we care about this lack of confidence or this undermining of confidence that we've experienced in the GMO world? My passion, U.S. agriculture, has been impacted negatively from an innovation standpoint most particularly. This is why we should care. The lack of public acceptance, and this would be for any sector, chills investment in the U.S. It's certainly chilled the investment in U.S. agricultural productivity. The lack of regulatory predictability and associated cost takes about $140 million to get a GMO seed to market in the United States. It creates bias towards sure bets, which means that other crops, minor crops, other diverse crops, those improvements are overlooked or are not investigated because it's so costly. At the bottom, I have a what-if panel. What if pigs were produced so that their manure resulted in contained less phosphate going into the environment? That was stopped. That project was stopped because of the challenges getting it through the regulatory system. The next one is, what if is an example of dairy cow dehorned. Most folks don't know that all dairy cows in the United States are dehorned. Their horns are either burned off or sawed off. It's excruciating for the animal. Mostly they collapse in shock, and the farmers hate doing it. Of course they hate doing it. Well, we now have a company, Recombinetics, that has identified the gene for horn production in cows. They silenced it. They now have cows that are born without horns. Boy, I hope this can get through the regulatory process sooner rather than later. It'll revolutionize the dairy herd in the United States. In the middle, anyone who's from Florida knows this, citrus greening. It's a bacteria that is devastating and will continue to devastate orange production in this state and across all citrus-producing states, ultimately in the United States. If it weren't for one company, Southern Gardens, I don't think this project would have gotten off the ground. This one I love, the purple tomato. This is a project that's ongoing in Cambridge. Wouldn't it be awesome if tomatoes, which can be grown anywhere in the world, had the antioxidant power of blueberries at the price of tomatoes? I hope we get to see this soon. Think about it. You wouldn't have to, tomatoes are a bargain sometimes compared to berries. Wouldn't it be awesome? And then lastly, peanuts. University of Virginia was looking into this. As you know, peanuts harm people every year because they're allergic to peanuts, and peanuts are in a lot of products. University of Virginia, they've knocked out the gene that provides the allergenicity of the peanut. After talking with EPA, they stopped the project because they didn't think they could afford it. They couldn't spend the time to get through the regulatory process. The cost of regulation deters new entrants into the marketplace. I've given you some of the examples, but I'm also talking about everyday companies. As a result, you may have seen this, the seed industry is consolidating, the animal industry is consolidating. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but folks who say, we don't like big ag, we don't like multinational companies, their efforts are creating big ag and multinational companies and consolidation. Multinational seed companies, when I came to bio, we had 6. Now we have 3. Animal husbandry companies, there are a number of them, but 4 of them are now under one company. U.S. agricultural competitiveness is threatened. With regard to what did we learn from these activities, we know that the anti-biotech, anti-GMO industry is cyclical. It's well coordinated, very well funded. There's not enough money. You can't print enough money to fight it. It's politically extremely well connected, and they have great messaging. It's emotionally driven, and it's very effective. In the meantime, we were talking about science. Food companies, many feel they have no choice but to enter into this marketplace to stay competitive. Some have had a philosophical change. And of course, they all, as they should, as for-profit entities, look for market opportunities. Online and across social media, GMOs and GMO developers, the seed companies and the animals, they were being condemned. Yet the technology advocates, myself, my companies, we were nowhere to be found online as late as 4 years ago. What also did we learn? Science is no longer sufficient to carry the day, right? In my field, in biotech sector, we just talk science. Someone asked us about a concern, GMOs and cancer, we talk science. And they didn't agree, so we talked louder and louder about science. I had to learn an entire new lexicon in order to help change the conversation. How did we need to reach out and connect with people? We know that communicating about how food is grown, doesn't matter what sector you are, what food sector you're in, it is critical, and the need is here to stay. Reaching consumers directly as a block, we also learned, as I just mentioned, is cost prohibitive. We don't have enough money to help folks understand about GMOs. So what did we do? We developed the communications initiative that Patty mentioned in my introduction, GMO Answers. This was a sea change for very conservative biotech seed companies. We opened our doors. We reframed our messaging to connect with consumers. We had been using words like safe, leading with words like safe, affordable, abundant. They were actually getting the opposite reaction that we wanted. We launched an interactive GMO Answers website, gmoanswers.com. You can go to it if you're online now. This initiative was anchored by this website. The public was invited to ask any question they had about GMOs. And what we did was bring together a community of experts, completely independent from our industry and industry experts, to answer those questions. We allowed comments, see the dialogue, and we showed them all. And I can tell you that when I was meeting with some congressional members, they said they loved the site, but that what really helped them was to look at the comments and see what the whole conversation was looking like, so they could then choose to follow the evidence or to ignore the evidence, but they were seeing the whole thing. That one step, I think it almost got me fired, to allow those comments to be shown, but I believe that it's one of the keys to our success. On GMO Answers, in addition to having the interactive dialogue with folks who have questions, we provide factual information based on the preponderance of the scientific evidence. We answered all questions, as I mentioned, and provided information on all things. If you had questions about patents, you don't like that companies can patent biotech seed, we answered it. If you feel that mandatory labeling is the way to inform consumers, we answered it. I'll just tell you that at GMO Answers, I absolutely believe in the consumer right to know. We have a 21st century consumer base. They have questions. We need to provide the information. I don't believe that it should be used as a warning and a skull and crossbones. But I'm telling my members now, my pet food company members, we will find a way to provide information for folks who are seeking it. If you have questions about business practices, the environment, the impact of the environment, the impact on society of the adoption of GMO to seed technology, you can find answers on GMO Answers. And not only do you get an answer, you get the picture of the person who answered it, and you get a summary of their credentials. We focused on credible media and legislators. This is the part that this was the result of the learning that we could not address, we could not reach consumers as a block. So what we did was focus on the folks who hear from consumers every single day. We did countless media briefings and town hall meetings. That "we" was me. I loved it. It was so fun. It was the best. We participated in federal and state legislative hearings and briefings and meetings whenever asked, and we also asked for a few. We met with influencers to help bring awareness to the science behind GMOs, the facts about GMO seed, farmers, chefs, grocers, academicians, bloggers, dietitians, and others. And this was a great move. Seed companies conducted research facility tours to show interested folks how this technology is done. And if you'll bear with me for a couple of slides, I'll just tell you how it's done. Traditional breeding, when folks think about plants being bred or animals being bred, this is what they're thinking about. A female and a male plant are crossed, they produce progeny. Right? Traditional breeding is what changed, is what gave us nature's, what turned nature's watermelon, corn, banana, eggplant, carrot, and kale into the products we see in the supermarket. What you see before you is nature's variety of those. That's all been changed by traditional breeding over millennia. So what's going on at the DNA level? On the right side, you see a male plant and a female plant. And for simplicity purposes, my Ph.D. advisor would kill me if he saw this slide. The DNA is represented as beads on a string. So if you're a traditional breeder, you like the trait in this plant over here, and you want to put it in your crop over here. You have no idea what the gene is for that trait, but you cross them. And when you cross them, you get the bottom oval. You get the DNA from the mom and from the parents, both male and female. So you may get that trait you were looking for, but you're bringing everything, all the genetic material and traits from the plant that maybe you didn't want those. Maybe there's a toxin. Maybe it's soaks up a lot of water, whatever it might be. And then what you do is you take that new variety, it becomes the parent, one of the parents, and you continue to cross and cross and cross until hopefully you're able to get the crop that you want. It takes years, sometimes it takes generations. That's traditional crossing of plants. Mm-hmm. Traditional breeding is also mutagenesis. Most folks don't know this. When plant breeders in the 1930s and 40s said, we need more genetic variation. I can't achieve this trait by simple crossing, the example I showed you earlier. They exposed seeds to chemicals and radiation, hoping that that exposure would force some change in the DNA to get a trait that was interesting. I can't show you what's going on at the molecular level because we don't know, right? There could be 1,000 changes. There could be 10,000 changes. There could be one change. But you'd flood the seeds with chemicals, you'd grow them out, and then you'd look at your population. Did I get the variation that I was looking for? Since the 1940s, mutagenesis, chemical antiradiation, and it's still used today, has been used to introduce 2,200 modified crop varieties into the food supply. So whether you're whether you're a conventional breeder, conventional farmer, or an organic farmer, you're using these seeds from these traditional methods, right? There's no safety review of them. As a scientist, I have no concern. If there was harm, the plants wouldn't survive. But this is what we talk about when we have the umbrella traditional breeding. So this is GMO. What we do here is insert a gene for the trait we want. We've identified those genes. We make a copy, we put it in the plant, right? And then we grow up the product. No matter what anyone tells you online, those 8 crops in the middle are the only crops that have been genetically modified. So don't buy non-GMO cat litter. Just saying, right? If you want to avoid non-GM, these are the products that you may want to make another choice with. So what's going on here at the molecular level? Very similar to what I showed you in the crossbreeding. I have a plant, it has a trait, I can identify the gene, I make a copy of it, I cross it with my crop, and I get my new variety. What I don't have is all the genetic material I didn't want with the wild, in this case, the wild relative. Okay? In the last couple of years, you may have heard of a technology called gene editing, right? It does not use foreign DNA, to modify the plant. Instead, plant breeders go in and knock out the trait they don't want. That's what happened with the cows that were born without horns. Scott Fair and crew identified the pole gene, the gene that confers the trait for horn development in cows. He silenced it. Many of those products will be coming to the market soon. I think that most folks will think of all of this, whether it's a foreign gene or you just modify the native gene directly, as GMOs. Okay? So what was the impact of the work we did? Pretty quickly, I would say within 9 months, we did so many interviews. We began to see more accurate, balanced coverage across media, right? From folks we would expect to follow evidence, but many, many outlets which hadn't followed the evidence on GMOs before. This was the best. People began to push back on the false assertions that were being made online. No longer were they holding up without argument. We were, and the community that we had encouraged had a presence online. So when someone asserted that GMOs aren't safe, people we didn't even know would come online and say, that's not true. Every regulatory agency in the world has said otherwise, for example. When someone said GMOs are untested, folks we didn't even know pushed back and said, that's not true. Here's independent studies, long-term, short-term, hundreds of them. The crack was beginning to take hold. I can tell you by the time I left bio, we were viewed as a trustworthy resource by folks who were asking questions. They may not have agreed, but they knew we were going to get the preponderance of the evidence opinion, right? They could still walk away saying, I don't buy it. There was this one study over here, but at least they knew where to come to get the basis of the information. Media is using this site. Legislators are using this site. You will no longer see a credible media outlet, whether it's traditional, print, or online, make a false assertion about GMO safety. That is huge in just 3 years. And perhaps just as important is that on Capitol Hill, I haven't met a legislator that still believes that GMO safety is an issue. Lastly, and I think this is the reason Patty asked me to come in and speak with you, is that I think our lessons learned could be applicable across the board. If you're being challenged in traditional media and in the digital space by information that is not supported by the preponderance of evidence, if someone's trying to restrict your choice, that's always a red flag for me. This may be a methodology you might want to consider. And for us, this last one was absolutely key. There was a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness by the folks who had our livelihood in their hands: influencers, media, policymakers, legislators, regulators. And I believe that this effort helped to make them aware and to give them a place to go if they were challenged by someone calling into an office, for example. Thank you very much. Oh, we do. I hope I didn't go too fast. Thank you. Sure.
If I may, thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
It was about a week ago, there was an article in the New York Times that was suggesting that the promise of GMO has not delivered, and he used data, selective,
data,
of course,
because
right,
yes.
When you want to make a point, you select your data. Unfortunately, those of us who are in science don't get to do that. We have to look at all the data.
You have to look at all the data.
And so for anyone who's read that article in the Times and are concerned, or should you hear about it recently, I may put in a plug for another website. I just looked at yours. It's excellent, by the way, really good. I started to ask a few questions, and there's a lot of information there, so thank you for that site.
Sure.
There's another site I would like to direct people to. It's called the Genetic Literacy Project.
Perfect. Yeah.
And there's a terrific article in there by a plant scientist who points out the flaws in the data that was presented in the New York Times article. So I highly encourage you to read that, because when you compare apples to oranges, you get very different kinds of findings. You get, pardon me?
That's right.
Arctic apples.
Arctic
Yeah.
apples.
Well, in this case, the comparisons of the wheat in Canada versus what's grown in the U.S., for example, was a blatant misuse of information. So thanks. And again, it's the Genetic Literacy Project.com, I believe. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I became aware of the anti-GMO movement and how I stood on it through my awareness of agriculture because of the animal rights aspect of it. When I saw the debates going on among farmers and between activists and farmers, I figured out pretty quick who knew what they were talking about and who was just trying to make trouble. And then that sort of connected me to pages like GMO, LOL,
Yep.
and Kevin Folta,
Yep, he's awesome.
and Mark Linus,
Yep.
and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But there's been something that's been bugging me a lot, all the way through it, and that's where animal rights, pro-GMO, and climate come crashing together.
Mm-hmm.
And they fight each other.
They fight each other. That's right. So I don't personally, if you're basing your opinion on the preponderance of the evidence, and I keep using that word. Why do you keep using that word, Kathy? Because there's always going to be a study that may disagree with what we know, right? That's science. That's exploration. If that study can't be repeated, dismissed. If that study can be repeated, is published in a peer-reviewed, not pay-for, peer-reviewed journal, we should take a look. Maybe there's something there. So it confounds me as a scientist when folks who are fighting so hard for climate change mitigation are anti-vaxxers or anti-GMO. You can't pick and choose your science. You're either in, if you're following the evidence, or you're not, right? This is a huge conversation in state and the federal legislature, right? How can you be for science here and you can't be for science there?
Yeah, great talk, thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, your last comments are a great segue to my question. What's being done on the educational side? That is to say, it's a technology gap.
Yeah.
We need to educate the public about how good these tools are. What we're able to do in the lab now with CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing is so much better than doing random mutagenesis and selection. So I loved your comment about not bringing on the genetic material you don't need.
Right.
How do we educate people that we're so much better at doing only the change we want to make?
Yeah.
What are the efforts there?
So with regard to education, I think that the seed companies inviting folks in and showing them so that they'll write about it, certainly with GMO Answers, there's an education, it's not directed to students, but there's certainly an education initiative. We've got to get folks on the farm, right? We've got to tell folks what we do. I was intrigued with the Disney story, and I said to my table mate over there, Alice, I said, wouldn't it be awesome if when you thought of Disney, you said, oh yeah, the conservation company. Oh, they have theme parks too. Yeah. Wouldn't that be great? So the seed tech companies, they are doing so much good here and at home, but as corporate entities, they're just not ready to share all that information because they haven't before, right? I've heard the arguments for and against. My new companies, pet food companies, oh my God, they're all about pets. They're all about cats and dogs. They do so much good. But maybe it's, I don't know, untoward or something like that. They're hesitant to talk about what they're doing because I would say that if that information was out, that would lead others to find out more, to want to find out more about what these companies are about.
Well, that's part of the reason I ask is because that's not what you're set up to do.
That's right.
So
we're not set up to do that.
A university like the University of Washington, we're trying to put together movies to let people understand how this gene editing technology works.
Yeah.
Because there's the hobgoblin in the room is a lack of understanding.
Right.
And as soon as people realize these tools are accurate, there are no off-target effects,
Right.
then the battle could mostly be won.
Yeah, and I think perhaps universities, and I hate to push the buck, pass the buck, but certainly no one's going to believe me, right? No one's going to believe, I mean, as the source of information, even universities, where are you getting your funding for those movies, right? That is the environment we're in, and we're called into question. With GMO, and we knew that. With GMO Answers, we wanted folks to discover it for themselves, right? They didn't have to believe what was said, but look at the comments in, following the answer to your question.
I would advocate a tab on the site that says, this is how current gene editing technology works, just so people understand what they're looking at.
We do have on the site, and again, it's not my site any longer, but we do have the story of the rainbow papaya. So it's a hand-drawn infographic. Yeah. I think that's the only one. I checked the site again last night. But I'll tell the folks who are managing it now, thank you for your comment.
I don't want to jump in. Go ahead.
So it was a fantastic talk and a fantastic effort, and I appreciate it
Thank
very
you.
much. And I have a completely different question. So I work with animals in research, and so in basic biomedical research. But that means that everybody that has a question about animals in research of any sort will contact me for some reason, and I don't know anything about these other kinds of research. And so I've been recently asked this question, and you mentioned the products being tested. And so somebody asked me about animal work with respect to the testing of GMOs, and I know nothing about it, so maybe you can fill us in on that.
So with regard to animals,
So I can answer the question.
sure.
Yeah.
So it's they have to be approved to get on the market, and FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, is responsible for that. And the data that is required to get through that approval process addresses concern with regard to harm for the animal, harm to the environment. Much of that data is published.
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning the credibility of it at all, believe me. I guess I'm specifically trying to get an understanding of how they evaluate. I mean, so are they gavaging animals? I mean, like, I don't know, some animals aren't going to eat like tomatoes. They don't like tomatoes. So I think we had to teach cotton rats to eat tomatoes because we're doing some of, actually one of our researchers is he gets contracted to do a bunch of stuff, right? I'm just trying to, so what kinds of evaluations are done, right? So do the animals get gavaged, maybe some of the, or they learn to eat these foods, and then there are tissue samples collected? I mean, what's exactly done so that I can give accurate answers?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now you're talking, I see, you're not on the, you're talking about the,
No, because they don't give me
the
easy
evaluation of the
questions.
crops.
They want to know the
Right,
details, and I don't
right,
have them,
right.
yeah.
So they are largely, most commonly rat studies, although they've been studied in 9 to 11 species. Most commonly they're eating chow, rat chow, that would be made with this product. And then they're evaluated, yeah. Well, and during, right? How are they doing? How are they, their welfare and their health and their nutrition, all of that is being evaluated. The fact that they're most commonly studied for only 90 days was a huge issue for folks. What about long-term studies? And there's been a couple of studies since then that looked at the feeding of livestock, for example, over 30 years with GMO corn, soy. If there was a problem with GMO livestock, right, with seed and crops, farmers would have seen it. Also would medical animal study facilities, right? My postdoctoral fellowship was at Johns Hopkins. It's a huge animal population there being used to evaluate medicines. We would have seen it. We'd go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, in my case, animals every year. Farmers, millions of animals. So our farm community is a great example that crops made with this technology don't raise an issue, but independent studies have been done multi-generation, looking at the mom, the progeny, their progeny, their progeny. It's all online. And again, of course, it's DNA and protein, right? So it doesn't matter. Your body sees DNA. I mean, we eat DNA every day, right? Every whole food we eat and every smushed up processed food we eat, loaded with DNA, right? Our body sees it as DNA. It breaks it down, and then it builds the DNA back up to suit our needs. Same with protein. Doesn't matter where the protein comes from. Our body sees it as protein, digests it into amino acids or short strands of amino acids, uses it, breaks it down, absorbs it, uses it to make protein to support our well-being. That's how it works. So when folks say, I don't want to eat that, it might have some foreign DNA in it, your body doesn't know that. Breaks it down, recycles it. Yes, sir.
Follow-on question to that. What are we doing about getting this story into K through 12 education?
Oh, that's a great question.
And do children know who Norman Borlaug was?
They do not.
They need to.
They do not. Yep, absolutely. And that is, that is a what if that I don't think we have the answer to. I can tell you that Monsanto, an amazing company, brilliant, innovative company. They are. I know. I worked with them for years, right? Some folks may not like some things some business practices, but we don't want to, in my case, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Monsanto, did a children's book. I think it was about 15 years ago. It was for K through 3. So it was a coloring book, and it just said about modern agriculture. Hammered, because of course we're trying to brainwash kids. On the other hand, my college student youngest daughter, I have 4 daughters, the youngest one came home one day. She went to University of Colorado Boulder, and she said, you're working for Monsanto? I said, I am. Why? She goes, oh, they're just ruthless. I said, what are you talking about? And she gave me chapter and verse of a false case in Canada. I mean, if you read the case law, what she was telling me was completely inaccurate. But that's what she had been taught by her university professor. Again, I'd gotten smart in my days at bio, and I had to connect with her. I couldn't just say, oh, wrong, right? Read the case law. But I said, so you're concerned about one company's patent protection practices. She said, oh, Mom, ruthless. And I said, you mean ruthless like, please don't put this on tape. Do you mean ruthless like Steve Jobs ruthless? I mean like the patents that protect your iPod and your pad and your Mac? Mother. I got the mother. I need these products. But really, light bulb, Kathy. Folks don't know they need seed. They don't know where their food has come. But it was a change for us, my daughter and I. And she called me one day from Boulder and said, I've become a pariah in my food science class, because she stood up and told the truth. Right? It was really great.
I'd like to follow in a similar vein, so I put my extension hat back on again and put a plug in for the 4-H youth development programs and our opportunity to get science into these young people's hands, minds. And part of the national initiative within 4-H is science, engineering, and technology. And so what we need is the curricula that can get out to the land-grant universities, into the 4-H programs. Not only do we have this great impact and measurable impact on behavior change and knowledge change in these young people, but we have measures of how they influence their parents. And so to get to the adults, the children are terrific mechanisms.
They really are.
So
That's right.
to the extent that you and your organization can help create some of these documents, to hands-on learning opportunities, labs, real-world experiences to understand GMO, I think we can make some significant progress for the future.
I agree completely. And if your school is telling one side, please go in and ask them to tell the other side. I mean, I think that's what's key, right? You can't shut down the conversation, and you want people to make their own choice with facts in hand, right? They can believe it or not believe it, but because we don't know what their motivation is. I mean, it was at the beginning. I tell you, I just was really. I knew that some ag sectors would advocate against GMOs, right? This is their livelihood. Sure, they were doing that, but I also met people whose child died and was a huge fan of junk food, for example, which would have included GMO corn, right? Not that GMO corn is just junk food. In junk food, it's in 10,000 products, quite frankly. But this mom was worried. Did I do something to harm my child? And so I don't question folks' motivation when I talk about this or as I approach it, because it doesn't matter what the motivation is. Our job is to get out the facts and expose people to them over and over and over, and then they can make up their own mind, right? But they arrive. That's the key, I think, for us, was they arrive at their decision on their own, rather than being told by someone, this is the only truth, right? Both sides could say that. Yes, ma'am. I don't want to keep you longer, Ruth. You okay?
Good morning.
Okay, okay, good.
I'm just sitting up here.
Okay.
When I stand behind-
When I stand, that's okay, I'll know. That's my signal.
You started out talking about having been to the grocery store and seeing the enormous marketing and economic boost that's available by misleading information, basically. And it seems to me that I'm a fourth generation farmer person. Don't myself do it anymore, but our family grows sugar beets, and so have seen really firsthand the misdirection of the value of technology, and that technology really being an economic savior to much of the country and how we have traditionally survived. And now people go into a grocery store and really don't even understand where their food comes from, let alone what the impact is of the necessity of how things are grown. And not just here, but internationally, as we see more and more food import becoming a part of our day-to-day activity. So one of the concerns that I have really is the incredible push economically to make common food products premium food products by labeling.
Right, yep. And that's exactly what's happening. So buyer, be aware, right? Buyer, be aware. And if you're not familiar with this lady's story, Hershey's decided in 2015 it was going to phase out the use of genetically engineered sugar beets, right? That had been modified to be pest resistant, right? So farmers bought them, of course. I think 100% of our sugar beets in the United States are genetically engineered. Is that true? 100%. And it worked for them. They put less pesticide down. Better for them, better for their bottom line, better for the environment. But Hershey's made its decision, right? I don't fault them. Disappointed, but I don't fault them. And they're going to go to pure cane. They were using, I think, a half sugar beet sugar and half pure sugar cane. We don't grow enough sugar cane in the United States to feed that demand. Sugar cane is extremely environmentally intense. So the question I ask is, any company that's going in this direction is, what is that going to do to your sustainability goals? And ultimately, I believe the consumer's going to figure it out, right? So we've been online as a country for less than 10 years, really, maybe about 10 years. So all of a sudden you've got all this information, you don't know which way to turn, more and more reading, more and more asking, and I think that that folks who are marketing in a way that perhaps could be viewed as misleading, it's going to come back at them, right? It's going to come back to them. I personally negotiate with my feet. When I figure someone is trying to sell me a bill of goods, I don't shop there. But even my third grocery store now has got the in with the Muzak is non-GMO produce information. I don't shop there, and it's angering me because it's restricting my choice. There's one restaurant chain, fast food, I won't mention it. We will not have that. We will not have that food in our house, period. Yeah, well, good, except my girls, when I'm not home, like now, will be texting their dad going, "Dad, are you by insert name restaurant? Would you get me?" They're doing it. They're bootlegging it, right? It's coming in. But I can't, they've maligned American agriculture so badly, I can't support them any longer.
Along the lines of buyer beware, I'm very interested in fraudulent dietary supplements that seem to be so successful. And I see a parallel with the anti-GMO people. And what I think is a major problem is the gullibility of the American society in general. And rather than trying to force a message on somebody, I think if we're going to teach children, what we need to do is teach them critical thinking skills.
That's right, I agree.
So that they can make the right decisions.
Right, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's right. Perhaps that's the curriculum, right? The first focus for the curriculum. Last question.
Okay, this is short. Because I study evolution, I get asked about GMOs sometimes. And people suffer from, I have a perspective of the deep past, not the recent past. One of the things I say to people who are suspicious of GMOs, and this is absolutely true, every food you eat is genetically modified. What do you think those farmers are doing? What have they been doing for millennia? Do you replant the corn that's nasty and shriveled and makes small kernels that explode in the field and you can't even harvest them? No! People aren't that stupid. They haven't been that stupid since the year dot. You go for the ones that taste better, that produce better, maybe that resist drought better, where the soil doesn't have to be quite so good, or where you don't have to take quite so much care of the growing plant or the growing animal, because guess what? Our cows are genetically modified. Our pigs are genetically modified. It's all genetically modified. If you're going to start drawing fine lines between the ones where somebody's operating in the lab and somebody is operating actively through hands-on selection of what you are saving for the next reproduction, I think you're drawing very silly lines. All our food is genetically modified.
That's right. One of the most powerful slides I had, I just showed you a snippet of it, is what's nature's watermelon or nature's banana, right? So folks say, well, those ones that are changed are GMOs. They're not. That's what we've done over millennia, made dramatic changes. Seedless watermelon must be a GMO. Nope, mutagenized. All barley on this earth, mutagenized. So I think if folks understand the context and we're still walking around upright, it helps to understand. But it's not, we can't lead with science. We're missing the mark if we're leading with science and evidence. We have to bridge to it. We have to care, just as with my daughter, right? As I was shaking my head and saying, why am I paying for this education? It was the link to her electronics that actually got her to think.
Just very quickly, because I know she's in a hurry.
She's up. She's standing.
Okay. Yeah, she's getting closer. Okay, that's the key.
She is.
Everybody knows that I grow, as a hobby, rare tropical fruits, especially like mangoes. Yeah. And one example that it helps, with the genetic and everything, for us to get the different varieties, you have to get all the seeds from one tree and plant them and wait 20 years. 20 years for those seeds, that tree, to have fruits. And from there, you pick the good ones, and from then on, you graft them. You just keep copying the same tree and tree. Right. With a genetic, it's going to cut all those 20 years to see what you're going to get, because you can plant 100 seeds. That's in 20 years, you might not even have one that you can use. So that's what is the importance of having, the genetics, being doing it instead of the way we do it.
Yeah. And I agree with you completely, but I support choice. So if you're an organic producer or an organic shopper, organics doesn't allow the use of GMOs, that's fine, right? If you're conventional, that's fine. My goal is to help folks. I'm doing the same thing now with cat and dog food, right? Just make an informed choice. The choice has to be yours. Thank you.